You know, there's a popular saying on the internet.com which goes as follows. If you want to make a progressive angry, give them exactly what they ask for. And a perfect example of this is what is going on between the city of Chicago and the state of Texas when it comes to this migrant crisis. Now, we last left off with the story that I highlighted, brought to you guys out there in the public, of the city of Chicago deciding that they were going to try to secretly close their borders while Brandon Johnson was pretending that Chicago is just as welcoming to migrants as it's ever been and totally is not in betrayal of their values. Well, Greg Abbott, the Texas governor, has decided to step up his efforts. If Chicago's going to impound buses, then Texas is going to fly the migrants in, and all of a sudden, Brandon Johnson is demanding border controls for the city of Chicago that he called evil white racism when they're proposed and talked about for our nation as a whole. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. So when we last left off in this story, what happened was as follows. The city of Chicago decided that they were going to strike back against the city of Texas. They passed a series of ordinances to make it more and more difficult for buses of migrants to come into the city of Chicago, and even went as far as fining the bus operators based on the number of illegals on the bus to the tune of $750 per illegal, and they also required permits, which are incredibly difficult to get, and they decided that they were going to tow buses that were not in compliance with these ordinances.
And we have just learned in the last couple of hours that the city of Chicago has impounded a migrant bus for the first time. The city council passing a measure today to start impounding buses that do not obtain a permit from CDOT.
Now, I've been on to Brandon Johnson and the city of Chicago for a very long time. I've been giving you video after video where I've been talking about how the black residents of the city of Chicago are sick and tired of these migrants. They don't want them there, and how this is tanking Johnson's approval rating. But I've also told you that despite the fact that Brandon Johnson is still calling everybody racist, is saying that the only reason he's getting migrants is because he's black, and the state of Texas is angry about the Civil War and is angry about a black man being free.
It is abysmal, and it's an affront for everything that is good about this country. For the extremism in this country to use people as political tools to settle political scores for something that happened 400 years ago. They're still mad that a black man is free in this country.
And in reality, the city of Chicago's actual position, their actual goal, what they've actually been doing, is making it more and more difficult for migrants to come to their city, trying to seal their border, while condemning every Republican for asking for the federal government to do its damn job and do the same.
Look, Pastor Will Hall, who's also an alderman of the 6th Ward, visited the border. He saw the chaos firsthand. And so part of our effort to go to the border was to make sure that there was better coordination with the flow of migrants who are seeking asylum here.
And I think right there is a perfect example of this. You have Brandon Johnson talking about this alderman who's a pastor who says that he's going to the border and he's telling the migrants that we need to coordinate better. We still want you here. You're welcome here. But then when you cut to what this guy actually is saying, this alderman, he's telling the migrants that Chicago's too cold for them. They don't have any room. They're going to sleep on the ground, so they better go somewhere else.
6th Ward Alderman Will Hall, who traveled to the border a few weeks ago, says word is spreading on social media among migrants that Chicago may not be the best place to come. And border nonprofits say not as many people are asking to come to Chicago.
Well, people are beginning to get informed that it's cold, the opportunities are scarce, and that unless you want to sleep on a concrete mattress, don't come. And that's what those who have come seeking asylum have said.
Well, the city of Chicago has actually taken it a step further than that. They're now suing various bus companies across the nation rather than addressing the federal government's immigration controls and the lack thereof.
Chicago's Democrat Mayor Brandon Johnson has decided to sue bus companies for transporting illegal migrants into his sanctuary city.
Last month, Chicago's City Council passed a series of laws meant to regulate buses dropping off migrants. he's now launched 55 lawsuits against what he's deemed rogue companies for violating the regulations.
Because he's trying to go after the source of migrants without actually saving face. He's trying to target states like Texas, states like Arizona, which, by the way, Arizona has a blue governor and they're shipping migrants across the country, rather than actually acknowledge that he was wrong and that Chicago's welcoming ordinance that promises all these benefits to illegal immigrants is actually a magnet for those illegal immigrants, is actually a source of the problem, and a sane, smart solution would be to actually have border controls from the federal government and stop allowing these people to commit asylum abuse. I saw this amazing number, and I gotta bring it to you guys. Under the Trump administration, there was a backlog of immigration adjudication. It was about 1.2 million, and this was throughout the whole term. This was the peak number. However, under the Biden administration, that number has risen to 3 million. So we have 3 million cases on the docket to be reviewed by these immigration judges. And if you followed some of the on-the-ground reporting of these particular instances, what you'll end up finding out is that a lot of these people have court dates as far out as 2031. So the Biden administration strategy is to essentially let these people into the country, let them flood the border, incentivize that flooding the border, give them court dates, which allows them to have legal status 7 years out. Maybe they'll start a family, maybe they'll get married, maybe they'll do whatever. So even if their asylum claim turns out to be completely illegitimate, by the time it's actually adjudicated, these people will already be established in the United States of America. They'll already have a child that is born a U.S. citizen in the United States of America, and it will be virtually impossible to deport these people in the future. Essentially, Biden is trying to bring in new future Democratic voters, and he's allowing the abuse of the asylum system that we all understand is being abused in order to do so. But the Texas governor is not having it. The Texas governor is well aware that the Biden administration is also not reimbursing states and local municipalities for the expenses of these so-called asylum seekers. So what he's trying to do, rather than have small Texas towns pay the cost of these migrants, is ship them to the various cities and states that have said that they're welcoming, they want the migrants, and have advocated for open borders. And what's interesting about this is that it's essentially worked in each and every place. In New York, we have Governor Hochul and Mayor Eric Adams saying that they're sick of the migrants. They've totally changed their tune. They've totally changed up their rhetoric. Now, Adams still plays the race card here and there, but they're much more willing to go after the Biden administration. And this has been true in various left-wing cities that declared themselves sanctuary cities and doubled down on their efforts to be sanctuary cities during the Trump administration. However, Brandon Johnson is trying to make it seem like he won't break. He's trying to make it seem like he is welcoming to these migrants, while at the same time initiating all of these steps in order to block them.
Well, a private plane took dozens of migrants from Texas to Chicago. It's Governor Abbott's latest effort to send asylum seekers from the southern border to so-called sanctuary cities.
Fox 4's Dan Godwin is here with us in studio with that story. Dan?
Shannon, first it was migrants being bused out of Texas to Democratic-run cities up north, some 80,000 of them. Now we're seeing them placed on airplanes.
So like this local news report laid out, the Texas governor had been shipping migrants to the tune of 80,000 of them to the various progressive sanctuary cities across the country. However, I want you guys to really think about the numbers and think about how the migrants are actually making their own way to these cities based on their benefits, because he said that it was 80,000 total that Abbott had sent so far, but the city of New York alone has well over 100,000 migrants just in New York City. So it's not just the busing by Greg Abbott, which is a smart, savvy political maneuver. Some people got mad at me because I called it a stunt. It is an effective stunt. By its very nature, it's a stunt. I am in support of the stunt because it is very important to make people feel the extent of these policies, but it is also incredibly important for people to understand that this is only a small portion of the migrants that are making their way to these various left-wing cities. In reality, they are choosing to go to Chicago. In reality, they are choosing to go to New York City. And in reality, as somebody who was recently in the Arizona airport, a bunch of left-wing progressive organizations are sending these migrants across the country, giving them the addresses of social service offices, which we will talk about a little bit in the future. But that is not what what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today is this new flight program to bring the migrants into the city of Chicago and the reaction to that.
Governor Abbott's office says the first flight with 120 migrants arrived at Chicago's O'Hare Airport Tuesday night from El Paso. It was a private plane. On Monday of this week, Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson announced harsher penalties for bus drivers who don't follow guidelines for dropping off migrants. The penalties include impounding and towing buses that try to skirt the law. Governor Abbott's office told us since the Chicago mayor is, quote, targeting migrant buses from Texas, we're expanding our operation to include flights to Chicago.
So this is a genius maneuver by Greg Abbott for a number of reasons. Now, to be clear, it is incredibly questionable what the city of Chicago is doing to these Texas bus companies. The constitutionality of requiring permits for out-of-state companies to even travel to your city seems absurd, seems ridiculous, seems like it won't stand up in court. But Brandon Johnson is trying to stall, delay, and prevent migrants from coming into his city now, so even if that is adjudicated later to be unconstitutional and unlawful, that's perfectly fine because this is designed as a delay tactic. However, what Abbott is doing by sending these migrants to fly to them is actually using something that is completely out of the control of the city of Chicago, which of course is the airport, air travel, and all that. Because the skies in the United States of America are regulated by the FDA, and as long as you dot your I's and cross your T's, get these people to sign that they want to go to Chicago, like the state of Texas is doing, they're able to fly them, and there's nothing that Mayor Brandon Johnson can do against them, because it's not like the Chicago PD, on his behest, can just go and impound the planes the same way that they're doing the buses, regardless of whether or not that will be deemed unlawful in the future later. Now, this escalation has been brought to Brandon Johnson's attention, and he is not happy about it. He's very angry about it, actually, and he actually gave one of the funniest interviews related to this, because it just goes to show you the level of hypocrisy that they're operating with in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, what we know is, as I've said repeatedly, the governor of Texas is determined to create chaos throughout the entire country. And this is after the city council passed an ordinance that I put forward to provide more structure, to provide more calm, and some more coordination with how buses are arriving in the city of Chicago. And quite frankly, what's actually quite disturbing is that many of the individuals who are coming from the border, there's no coordination at the border either. So many of the individuals are not being treated, they're not being processed, they're not getting medical attention. So by the time they arrive in the city of Chicago, they're coming in quite severe conditions: cold, tired, wet, hungry, traumatized. The type of chaos that this governor is insistent on creating throughout this entire country. And so we've put forth very clear guidelines. You can drop families off. Buses can come to the city of Chicago between these particular hours. We have to have a 48-hour notice. We need a full manifest. We need to know who is on the bus, the conditions in which these individuals are arriving in, so that we can provide the type of care that's needed.
So one of the things that is so interesting about Brandon Johnson's stances on migrants from Texas, on these buses and people showing up in his city, coming into his borders, is the fact that all of these policies would be good policies if the federal government instituted it against people coming into our nation. But the thing is, he's talking about travel from between states, from between cities, from between local municipalities, and in reality, he has no authority to implement nor demand this. But I do find it amazing that to enter the city of Chicago, not the United States, we need to know your medical history. We need to know if you have illnesses, communicable diseases, and all sorts of things before we allow you to come in. Your vaccination status, and not just for COVID, but for other vaccines, all of that needs to be presented in document form to the city of Chicago before they let you in. On top of that, we need a complete manifest. Every single person that enters the border of the city of Chicago should be named, should be identified well. We should have that paperwork clean, and we also need 48 hours of advance notice before they show up to the city of Chicago. Again, fascinating how Brandon Johnson views immigration or migration to the city of Chicago versus the illegal immigrants that are surging the border and claiming asylum at our southern border. Now look, while you easily could talk all day about the complete and utter hypocrisy, the blatant hypocrisy of Brandon Johnson, that's some low-level analysis. We could all see that, we can all understand that, but more importantly, at this point in time, people on the right need to understand that left-wing progressives don't care about being hypocrites. He wants to be the guy who's virtue signaling because that's going to be covered by the national media, while simultaneously trying to institute stricter border controls than anything we've had in this country in the decades. But the thing is, what this is actually about and what you should actually focus on is the fact that Brandon Johnson cannot stand to live up to his own values. This is Brandon Johnson fighting against exactly what he wants for the country, and it's important not to just point out the hypocrisy, not to just shame him, not to just show him saying clip X and then doing action Y, but actually force him to live up to it. No manifest, no information, no medical history, no nothing for Brandon Johnson. He has to figure it out the very same way that people at the southern border have had to figure it out for decades. He has to deal with this. He has to assess the threats of these individuals. He has to house them. He has to put them up. He has to live up to his values. Again, it's not hypocrisy that we're looking for. It's actually forcing him to deal with the consequences of his own actions and forcing all of these left-wing progressives to live up to their values, because we know it's hurting them. We can see it. And it's not just in the budget cuts to all these various departments. We could see it in the poll numbers. We could see it in his approval rating, and we need to keep leveling these places with these migrants until we get the change on the federal level. The fact of the matter is, just like the crime issue, like we talk about a lot on this channel, it's not going to get solved unless both parties are on it. So right now, the goal is to force the Democrats' hand, force them to get on the immigration issue so that we can actually have a solution, so that we can have border security, and so that we can reinstitute sensible policies like Remain in Mexico, which prevent these people from going through 12 different countries in order to get to the United States of America. Again, at the Phoenix airport, I was there in person. We saw migrants who came through the southern border, taking flights, being paid for by a nonprofit that's heavily subsidized by the federal government, by state governments, to go to various shelters in various liberal cities. And these people were from Guinea. They were from Africa. So they landed somewhere in South America, somewhere in Central America, and they made their way to this border, and their asylum claim is treated as seriously as somebody who didn't pass through 12 different countries and actually has a legitimate fear for their safety or legitimate fear of persecution. We need to enforce upon all of these people, upon all of these other countries, to actually follow the rules of asylum in a genuine, honest, and earnest way, and that does not include getting your first choice, being able to be an economic migrant, while at the same time claiming fraudulently some level of persecution that cannot be proved out by the facts.
The move not going over well with some Chicago elected officials.
We have a governor that now openly and defiantly is saying that he's going to commit human trafficking to show Chicago and to teach us a lesson.
Now, I just thought this clip was particularly funny because you have a city council member of the city of Chicago claiming that the Texas governor is supporting human trafficking in order to defy Chicago's law. And this makes me laugh because one of the issues that people have brought up time and time again when it comes to the southern border is the issue of human trafficking. But all of a sudden, that's a big problem when you actually get consent from the migrants in order to send them to liberal cities, even though that wasn't a serious issue when it was being brought up by red states earlier. Again, make them swallow their words, make them live up to their own values, force them to pay for what they were laughing at and shaming people in southern border states for complaining about paying for decades in this country. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. As usual, if you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the migrant disaster and the Texas governor trolling / waging war on Chicago. Till next time.